The tear-stained face of Penelope, Norwood stared down at the crumpled letter in her hands as the train whistle blew one final, mournful time and departed the dusty platform of Silvercreek station, leaving her utterly alone in a town she'd never seen before. The year was 1876, and at 20 years old, Penelope had just discovered that the aunt who had promised to meet her at this remote Wyoming Territory outpost had died 3 weeks prior. Miss. The station's closing for the night, the station master called, his voice tinged with impatience rather than sympathy. Can't have you staying here. Town's got a hotel down the way. Penelope wiped her eyes, embarrassment heating her cheeks. I haven't any money for a hotel, sir. My aunt was supposed to. Her voice trailed off as the man shook his head and turned away. The setting sun cast long shadows across the wooden platform as Penelope gathered her single trunk and small carpet bag. The sum total of her possessions after the orphanage in Boston had finally released her to her only living relative. The same relative who now lay in Silvercreek Cemetery. I have nowhere to go, she whispered to herself, tears flowing freely now as she slumped onto her trunk. The cool autumn air chilled her as darkness began to fall, and the reality of her situation descended upon her like a physical weight. The sound of wagon wheels and horse hooves on packed dirt drew her attention. A large wagon pulled by 2 chestnut horses approached the station, driven by a broad-shouldered man whose face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He pulled the horses to a stop, observing her for a long moment before speaking. Station's closed, miss. I know, Penelope replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her tear-streaked face. The man stepped down from the wagon, and she could see him more clearly now, tall and weathered, with dark hair that curled at his collar and sharp blue eyes that seemed to assess everything in an instant. He couldn't have been more than 30, his movements suggesting the easy confidence of someone accustomed to hard work and harder decisions. You waiting for someone? He asked, approaching slowly as if trying not to startle her, my aunt, but I've just learned she's passed away. Penelope swallowed hard. I've come all the way from Boston and now I have nowhere to go. The man's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You're Eliza Norwood's niece, hope sparked in Penelope's chest. You knew my aunt. Everyone knew Eliza, good woman, tough as nails. He removed his hat, revealing a full head of dark hair. Isaac Ryder. I own the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Your aunt sold me a bull last spring. Penelope Norwood, she replied, instinctively extending her hand before realizing how improper it might seem. To her relief, he took it briefly, his calloused palm warm against her cold fingers. Can't leave you sitting here as night falls, Isaac said, glancing at her trunk. Wolves come down from the hills after dark, both the 4-legged kind and the 2-legged kind, if you take my meaning. Penelope felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling air. I could take you to the pastor's house, Isaac continued. Reverend Miller and his wife might put you up for the night until you sort things out. That's very kind, Penelope said, rising to her feet and brushing off her skirts. I would be most grateful. Without another word, Isaac lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, carrying it to his wagon and securing it. When he returned for her carpet bag, he noticed how Penelope swayed slightly on her feet. When did you last eat? He asked bluntly. Yesterday evening on the train, she admitted. I thought my aunt would have. Isaac nodded, understanding. Change of plans, we'll stop at the diner first, can't have you fainting from hunger. Before Penelope could protest, Isaac bent down and lifted her as easily as he had her trunk, carrying her to the wagon. She was too surprised and frankly too weak to object. I can walk, she managed to say. Save your strength, he replied, placing her carefully on the wagon seat. You've had a long journey and a harder day. As they traveled the short distance to the town's only diner, Penelope felt oddly secure beside this stranger, who seemed to have appointed himself her temporary guardian. The town of Silvercreek was small but bustling even in the early evening. A general store, saloon, livery stable, and a few other businesses lined the main street. Inside the diner, a matronly woman named Mrs. Peterson fussed over Penelope, bringing her a plate piled high with roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. "Poor thing," Mrs. Peterson said, refilling Penelope's coffee cup. "Eliza was so looking forward to your arrival. Had her spare room all fixed up with new curtains and everything." Isaac sat across from her, sipping his coffee and watching as color returned to Penelope's face with each bite of food. "Did my aunt leave a will?" Penelope asked Mrs. Peterson. "I'm afraid I know very little about her affairs." Mrs. Peterson and Isaac exchanged a glance. "Far as I know, everything would go to you," Isaac said. "Your aunt had the old Norwood place about 5 miles outside town. Good piece of land with a small herd of cattle. Nothing fancy, but it's self-sufficient if you know what you're doing." The implications of his words sank in slowly. "You mean, I've inherited a ranch, more of a homestead," Isaac corrected. "But yes, assuming the paperwork's in order, town lawyer can sort that out tomorrow." For the first time since arriving, Penelope felt a glimmer of hope. "I don't know the first thing about ranching." "Most don't when they start," Isaac said with a slight shrug. "Your aunt learned, so can you if you've got the will for it." After the meal, which Isaac insisted on paying for despite Penelope's protests, they made their way to the Reverend's house. The Millers were kind but clearly surprised by the late-night visitors. After hearing Penelope's situation, Mrs. Miller quickly prepared a small bedroom and provided a nightgown. "We'll take you to see Mr. Blackman, the lawyer, first thing tomorrow," Reverend Miller assured her. "He'll have your aunt's will and can advise you on your options." Isaac lingered at the door. "I'll come by in the morning," he told Penelope, "help you sort things out." "You've already done so much," Penelope said. "I couldn't impose further." "It's no imposition," he replied, settling his hat back on his head. "Your aunt was good to me when I was getting started. Least I can do is return the favor to her kin." That night, lying in a strange bed in a strange town, Penelope tried to make sense of the whirlwind her life had become. From the structured confines of the orphanage to potentially owning a homestead in Wyoming territory, it seemed impossible. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were not of her uncertain future, but of the steady blue eyes of the cowboy who had rescued her from the train station. Morning came with bright sunshine streaming through lace curtains. Mrs. Miller provided Penelope with a simple breakfast and a chance to freshen up before Isaac arrived, punctual as promised. The lawyer's office was a small building near the center of town. Mr. Blackman, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted them with formal politeness. "I've been expecting you, Miss Norwood, though I'd assumed you'd have arrived while your aunt was still with us," he said, leading them into his office. "I'm sorry for your loss." He retrieved a document from a filing cabinet. "Your aunt's will is quite straightforward. As her only living relative, you inherit the entirety of her estate, the homestead, livestock, and approximately $200 in the bank." Penelope felt lightheaded. $200. "A tidy sum," Mr. Blackman confirmed. "Your aunt was frugal. The property itself is free and clear, no mortgages or liens." "What would you recommend I do?" Penelope asked, feeling overwhelmed. The lawyer glanced at Isaac, who stood quietly by the door. "You have several options. You could sell the property and return east with the proceeds, or you could attempt to maintain it, though that would be challenging for a young woman alone." "There's a third option," Isaac interjected. "Hire help to teach you the business until you're capable of running it yourself." Mr. Blackman nodded. "A sensible approach, if somewhat unconventional. I should mention that your aunt had arrangements with several neighbors, including Mr. Ryder here, for mutual assistance during roundup and branding." "I'd like to at least see the property before making any decisions," Penelope said, surprising herself with her own decisiveness. "I can take you there now," Isaac offered. "It's on my way back to the Double R." An hour later, they approached a modest but well-maintained farmhouse nestled in a small valley with mountains visible in the distance. A barn, corral, and several outbuildings completed the homestead. A small herd of cattle grazed in a nearby pasture. "It's beautiful," Penelope breathed as Isaac helped her down from the wagon. "It's good land," he agreed. "Your aunt worked hard for it, started with nothing 20 years ago." Inside the house, Penelope was struck by how clean and orderly everything was. Simple furniture, handmade quilts, shelves of books. It was humble but comfortable. In one corner of the sitting room sat a small writing desk, and atop it, an envelope addressed simply, "To Penelope, should I be gone when you arrive." With trembling fingers, Penelope opened it and read, "My dearest niece, I pray this letter finds you well and that I am there to greet you when you arrive. But if fate has other plans, know that everything I have is now yours. I never had children of my own, but I have thought of you often over the years. This land can be harsh, but it rewards those who respect it. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Good neighbors are worth their weight in gold out here. Isaac Ryder, in particular, is trustworthy despite his gruff manner. Whatever you decide, whether to stay or return east, know that you have options now. That's more than I had when I came west, and it's all I ever wanted for you. With love." Your Aunt Eliza. Tears blurred Penelope's vision as she handed the letter to Isaac, who read it silently before returning it. "She was right about neighbors," he said quietly. "No one survives out here alone. Will you teach me?" Penelope asked suddenly. "About ranching, I mean. I could pay you from the money in the bank." Isaac studied her for a long moment. "It won't be easy. Days start before dawn and end after dark. Work's hard and sometimes dangerous." "I'm stronger than I look," she replied, "and I learn quickly." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We'll start tomorrow. First lesson is feeding livestock. I'll be here at sunrise." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Penelope had spent the night alone in her aunt's house, determined to face her new reality head-on. When Isaac arrived, she was already awake, dressed in the simplest clothes. She owned a plain skirt and blouse that she knew would soon be inadequate for ranch work. "You'll need proper clothes," Isaac said by way of greeting. "We'll go to the general store after morning chores." The day passed in a blur of new experiences. Isaac showed her how to feed the small herd of cattle, explained the irrigation system for the hay fields, and introduced her to the 2 horses in the barn, an older mare named Daisy that her aunt had ridden, and a sturdy gelding called Buck that pulled the plow and wagon. "Can you ride?" Isaac asked as they mucked out the stalls. "No," Penelope admitted. "There weren't many opportunities at the orphanage. We'll add that to the list. Can't run a ranch if you can't ride." By midday, Penelope's hands were blistered, her back ached, and her city's soft muscles screamed in protest. But she refused to complain, matching Isaac's tireless pace as best she could. At the general store, Isaac helped her select practical items: sturdy boots, work trousers, scandalous but necessary, he insisted, heavy gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her fair skin from the sun. Days turned into weeks, and under Isaac's patient tutelage, Penelope began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered muscles she never knew she had, developed calluses on her once soft hands, and learned to appreciate the silence of dawn and the brilliant canopy of stars at night. Isaac came every morning, spending hours teaching her before returning to his own much larger operation. Sometimes he brought one of his ranch hands, Thomas, to help with tasks requiring more strength or an extra pair of hands. As October gave way to November, Penelope noticed a shift in their relationship. Isaac's initial reserve had softened. He occasionally stayed for supper, and their conversations extended beyond ranch management to books they'd read, places they'd seen or hoped to see. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Penelope found the courage to ask about his past. "How did you come to own the double R?" Isaac was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "My father built it," he finally said. "Came west after the war, the Mexican War, not the recent one. Built it up from nothing like your aunt did here. And your mother died when I was 15. Fever took her." His voice was flat, but Penelope could hear the old pain beneath. "Father passed 5 years ago. Left the ranch to me and my brother, but Robert wanted no part of it. Sold his half to me and went to California. So you're alone too, Penelope observed softly. Isaac turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Not all who are alone are lonely, Miss Norwood. Penelope, she corrected gently. After all this time, I think you might call me Penelope. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing the valley in white. Isaac arrived at Penelope's door looking concerned. Storm's coming, he said without preamble. Big one, according to the old-timers. We need to prepare. They spent the day securing buildings, ensuring adequate feed was accessible for the livestock, and bringing firewood into the house. As twilight approached, the sky turned an ominous gray-green. You shouldn't try to make it back to your ranch, Penelope said, watching as the wind began to pick up, swirling snow into miniature cyclones. The storm's almost here. Isaac hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the propriety of the situation. I'll sleep in the barn, he decided. I've slept in worse places. Nonsense, Penelope replied firmly. The temperature's dropping fast. There's a perfectly good sofa by the fire, and I trust you as a gentleman. The blizzard raged for 3 days. Penelope and Isaac established a careful routine. He slept on the sofa while she took her aunt's bedroom, and they shared cooking duties for meals. During the days, they ventured out only to tend to the animals. The wind so fierce they used a guide rope strung between the house and barn to avoid getting lost in the whiteout conditions. In the evenings, confined by the storm, they talked. Penelope told him about growing up in the orphanage, about her dreams of having a family of her own someday. Isaac spoke of cattle drives to Cheyenne, of the changing West, of his hopes to expand his ranch operations. On the third night, as they sat before the fire sipping coffee, Penelope realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with this quiet, honorable man who had rescued her that first day at the station. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Isaac Ryder was established here, respected. She was still an Easterner playing at being a rancher. What could she possibly offer him? The storm broke the next morning. The world outside was transformed drifts higher than a man's head in some places, the landscape scoured clean and made new. Isaac prepared to leave to check on his own property. I'll come back tomorrow, he promised, tightening the cinch on his horse's saddle. Make sure you're all right. I'll be fine, Penelope assured him, though the thought of being alone again filled her with a curious emptiness. You've taught me well. Isaac paused, looking down at her from atop his horse. For a moment she thought he might say something more, but he merely nodded, turned his mount and rode away. The days grew shorter as winter settled in earnest across the valley. Isaac continued his visits, though less frequently due to the demands of his own ranch in the harsh weather. Each time he came, Penelope found herself watching the road long after he'd gone, an ache in her chest she couldn't explain to herself. Christmas approached, and Penelope realized it would be her first holiday truly alone. The orphanage, for all its faults, had always maintained traditions around the season. She decided to honor her aunt's memory by decorating the small house pine boughs over the mantel, red berries gathered from sheltered bushes, candles in the windows. 2 days before Christmas, Isaac arrived with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle. "Thought you might want this," he said gruffly, as if embarrassed by the gesture. They spent the afternoon setting up the tree in the sitting room, decorating it with paper stars Penelope had cut and strung on thread. The simple activity filled the house with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. "Will you come for Christmas dinner?" Penelope asked as Isaac prepared to leave. "I'm not much of a cook yet, but I can manage a decent roast." "I'd like that," he replied, his usual reserve softening into something that made her heart beat faster. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Penelope spent the morning preparing the meal, her thoughts constantly returning to Isaac. She had made him a gift, a new leather hatband tooled with a simple pattern. Her first attempt at the leatherworking her aunt's journals had described. When he arrived, Penelope was struck by the change in his appearance. Gone was the work-worn clothing, replaced by clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a vest she'd never seen before. He'd trimmed his hair and beard as well. "Merry Christmas," he said, presenting her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a rose. "It was my mother's," Isaac explained. "She would have wanted someone like you to have it." "Someone like me?" Penelope echoed, touching the brooch reverently. "Someone strong, determined." His eyes met hers. "Beautiful." The word hung between them, changing everything. Dinner passed in a pleasant haze, their conversation easier than it had ever been. As they sat before the fire afterward, Isaac finally spoke the words that had been building for months. "I didn't expect you," he said quietly. "When I found you at that station, I was just doing what anyone would do. I didn't expect to." "To what?" Penelope prompted when he fell silent. "To care for you the way I do." His voice was rough with emotion. "You should know I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures. But these months, watching you fight to make this place work, seeing your courage, I find myself thinking of you even when I should be focusing on other things." Penelope's heart soared. "I think of you too," she admitted. "More than I probably should." Isaac reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm not asking for promises. It's too soon and you're still finding your way here, but I'd like permission to call on you properly, to see where this might lead." "I'd like that very much," Penelope whispered. Their first kiss was tentative, sweet, a promise of possibilities rather than a demand. When Isaac left that evening, the world seemed filled with new potential, despite the winter's grip on the land. Spring came to the valley in fits and starts, warm days followed by snow flurries, the ground alternately muddy and frozen. Throughout the changing season, Isaac's courtship of Penelope continued. He brought her books from his own library, took her riding across the awakening landscape, and introduced her to trusted neighbors who might assist her with the coming year's work. By April, the valley was transformed. Green shoots appeared in the pastures, calves frolicked beside their mothers, and the work of ranching began in earnest. Penelope had hired a young man named Matthew to help with the heavier tasks, using some of her aunt's savings to pay his wages. Her relationship with Isaac deepened as they worked side by side during spring roundup, branding the new calves and repairing winter damage to fences and outbuildings. Each evening, exhausted but satisfied, they would sit together on her porch, planning the next day's work and sharing their hopes for the future. On a perfect May evening, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the last light of day painting the mountains gold, Isaac asked Penelope to become his wife. "I know it hasn't been a year yet," he said, holding her hands in his. "Some might say it's too soon. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Penelope Norwood, and I want to build a life with you." Penelope's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Yes," she answered simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in June in Silvercreek's small church, with Reverend Miller officiating. The entire community turned out for the celebration that followed, held at the Double R Ranch. Mrs. Peterson baked a 3-tier cake, and even Mr. Blackman unbent enough to dance a reel with the bride. As sunset approached, Isaac led Penelope away from the festivities to a hilltop overlooking both their properties. "I had a thought," he said, his arm around her waist. "Rather than choosing between our ranches, what if we combine them? The Double R and the Norwood place together would make a fine spread. Our children would have room to run," Penelope agreed, leaning into his embrace. Isaac looked down at her, his expression tender. "Children? I hope so," she replied. "A family of our own, Isaac. Something neither of us has had for too long." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, as the golden light of evening wrapped around them like a blessing. "From the moment I lifted you into my wagon," Isaac murmured against her lips, "something told me you were going to change my life. I just never imagined how completely, or how happily," Penelope added, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had found her when she was most lost. As they returned to their wedding celebration, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her here from orphaned and alone at a desolate train station, to beloved and belonging in this wild, beautiful place. Life would never be easy in this untamed country, but with Isaac beside her, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. 5 years later, the R. Norwood Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the territory. Isaac and Penelope's partnership proved as effective in business as it was in marriage, their complementary strengths creating a thriving enterprise. Their family had grown as well. 3-year-old Elizabeth, named for Penelope's aunt, had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. 1-year-old James toddled after his sister on sturdy legs, already trying to keep up. On the anniversary of the day they'd met, Isaac and Penelope made a tradition of visiting the Silvercreek station together. Standing on the platform where she had once sat crying and alone, Penelope would take her husband's hand and remember how a single act of kindness had changed the course of 2 lives forever. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him once. "Stopping that day?" Isaac pulled her close, his expression serious. "Every day of my life," he replied. "I thank God I arrived when I did. Not because I saved you, Penelope, but because you saved me from a life I didn't even realize was empty until you filled it." In the years that followed, their love only deepened, weathering the storms that came both literal and figurative. They faced droughts and blizzards, economic downturns and cattle thieves, the birth of 2 more children and the loss of 1 never born. Through it all, they remained each other's strength and solace, bound by a love that had begun with a simple act of compassion at a lonely Wyoming train station. What had started as charity had become the greatest treasure of their lives, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by courage, and by love that grew stronger with each passing season.